More witnesses took the stand today in the trial of a Duluth man accused of killing a toddler. Jordan Carter is charged with second-degree murder in the death of 3-year-old Cameron. Cameron was the son of Carter's then-fiancée, Heather Bouchard. In September of 2020, Carter was taking care of Cameron, as he often did when Bouchard was at work. And Carter claimed while he was getting dinner ready, he heard Cameron fall down the stairs. He said he went to check on the boy, but it didn't appear he was hurt. The next day, Cameron stopped breathing and was taken to the hospital. He died days later. And medical experts say the boy's injuries actually showed signs of child abuse. They ruled his death a homicide. Now, 2 years later, Carter's trial is in its second day. Northern News Now's Rob Coles was in the courtroom for us today. Rob, walk us through what happened.
Well, Dan, the court proceedings started off today with the defense questioning Heather Bouchard. At the time of her son's death, she was living with Carter in the basement of his family's home in Duluth, along with another adult and another child. Now, the defense steered her testimony to the more pleasant aspects of Carter's relationship to Cameron. When the defense asked questions about Carter's involvement in Cameron's life, she said Cameron was drawn to Carter in the best way possible. She replied yes when the defense asked if Carter would attend doctor visits with her and her son. She also confirmed that Carter never seemed to lose his patience with Cameron, and that Carter suggested he stay home and provide daycare for her son when he was laid off during the pandemic. The defense also displayed the text messages between Carter and Bouchard on September 4th, the day after the fall, until Carter found Cameron unresponsive after 5 p.m. But the bulk of today was spent on the state questioning Dr. Lauren Jackson, a forensic pathologist with the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office, who ruled that Cameron's death was a homicide. Dr. Jackson went through all the scientific procedures his team utilized to come to that conclusion. He says Cameron had substantial bruising on his body. Some bruises weren't consistent with falling down the stairs. Jackson also focused on the time inconsistencies between when Cameron fell down the stairs and when he was discovered unresponsive. Cameron had his fall on September 3rd and woke up and seemed to be back to normal on the 4th before he collapsed later that day. Jackson also explained some of the traumatic brain injuries Cameron had, including bleeding in his optic nerves. And the defense also spent time cross-examining Dr. Jackson. They seemed to focus their questions around the process Jackson used to establish when Cameron could have received those bruises. And at the time of Cameron's death, he also was healing from a possible broken rib. Both the state and defense tried to pinpoint when and how that injury could have happened. And we expect more witnesses to testify tomorrow. Dan?
It's a really sad story to follow. Thank you, Rob. Our team will continue following this story, and we have all the information about the trial and the original case at northernnewsnow.com.